About 150 million years ago, the crust of western North America was being bulldozed by the Pacific tectonic plate, folding continental rocks miles thick, and even wedging massive slabs on top of each other in an overthrust. This mountain building lasted nearly 100 million years and saw the rise of the giant dinosaurs, the insects, and the flowering plants. Then, about 70 million years ago, all that crustal scrunching took a break from applying that pressure and even relaxed enough to spread all those folds along a 1,000-mile fault line, creating a massive valley stretching from Alaska to Idaho, known to geologists as the Rocky Mountain Trench. While that rift valley was widening, an asteroid from outside our solar system paid a surprise visit to the Gulf of Mexico, and the dinosaurs were gone. In all that time, since the beginning of the dinosaurs until today, through ice ages interrupted by periods of global warming, there were birds. Somewhere, as those massive glaciers carved the Rocky Mountain Trench even deeper, and birds discovered that migrating with the seasons increased their chances of survival, they said to themselves, "Let's take the superhighway." Fast forward the clock to the last ice age, and the Kootenai people said, "We're safe here in this trench, and the food we need comes to us every year. It feels like home." Fast forward again, all the way to 2007, with a couple called the Caseys, hiking out of the trench, a small part now called the Flathead Valley, up to the east ridge of the rift. Their trail opened on a brushy slope into the entirety of where they got to live. The whole Flathead Valley presented itself as an expanse of lakes, farmland, and subdivisions. They likely paused and took a breath or two, once again grateful for their good fortune.
My wife Suzanne and I came up and we put ourselves on that lower elevation point at about 10:30 in the morning, and in the first half hour we saw 30 birds fly by right here up on the ridge, so we said we better get up there. Ended up in 4 hours we saw 168 birds, which is, still right up there among some of the better days that we've ever had up here. So in 2008 we started trying to do season-long surveys, and we've tried to start every year the last week of August and then run until the snow kind of makes access unsafe or untenable. And so we've been doing it annually ever since, and we pay usually one or more technicians to try to guarantee that we'll get 25 or 30 surveys done by them, and then the rest of it's been with volunteer observers. And we've got now a cadre of, probably 25 people have served as a primary observer over the years, but about half a dozen or more now that are pretty regularly volunteering their time and have seen, thousands of birds up here and have the experience to do it.
As a kid, I became interested in birds by watching them fly, and like a lot of people, we wish we could be a bird and can't do that. So when I went off to college, I ended up studying zoology. For extracurricular activity, I got involved with skydiving because I thought, looks like it would be as close to being a bird as possible. So I started skydiving and went on a parallel path. And I actually probably majored in skydiving and minored in zoology, but at the end of the day, I finally got my degree. What I didn't realize is that I would get very involved in the skydiving to the point that it became my passion. Spent about 30 years doing everything possible, competing and setting world records, and actually got involved in doing stunts for movies with this. Eventually, I came back to my roots 30 years later and got into the birding in a big way, which brought me to hawk watching and everything else birding. I joined a group that was starting a hawk watch observation point up here in the Flathead, up in Jewel Basin. And I just couldn't get enough of it. And I got to go hiking, which I hadn't been doing much. So I get to hike, I get to go watch raptors, I get to stay away from humans all day long.
All of a sudden, something's dive bombing the owl, and I'm like, Barbara, grab the owl. And I look, and there is a peregrine just right there above our heads. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And that day, I think we had 300 and some. It was just, and I just remember being in tears sometimes.
So on the very first year of the Hawk Watch, I met this woman, Lisa Bate, and she was coming up there and we were sharing these days, 4 or 5 days together late in the season. The average temperature was maybe 20 degrees and the speed of the wind was maybe 20 knots. So we were in balaclavas and we were, couldn't really see much of each other, and we were fighting the wind and the cold, and we were doing everything we could to keep our notes with our frozen hands. I didn't see her again until we had sort of a potluck for everybody for the end of the season. And Lisa comes up with her husband and says, "Hi, BJ," and I look at her and I didn't recognize, I didn't know who she was. She said, "It's Lisa." It's the first time I'd ever seen Lisa without her balaclava on. I didn't know what she looked like.
There's two things that make this a unique Hawk Watch site. One is that we have a large percentage of our birds are accipiters. It's probably the best accipiter site in the northern Rockies, certainly. And we average about 2,500 birds for a season total. Last year we had over 4,000 was our best season up here. Sharp-shinned hawks is our most abundant bird, followed by Cooper's hawks and golden eagles and red tails. One of the nice things about this site is the birds come so close that we can identify young birds and tell them from adult birds. So we get age ratios, which is kind of meaningful over time as an index of how reproductive success is going for those species, especially if you combine it with data from other Hawk Watch sites. We've seen 18 different raptor species up here. The rarest is the gyrfalcon. We've only seen 2 of those over the years. We get small numbers of peregrine falcons and prairie falcons every year, merlins, kestrels, so we get all the falcons. The 2 buteo species that we get the least often, the soaring type hawks, are more prairie species, the ferruginous hawk and Swainson's hawks. Those are always a treat when we get those. We'll only get 1 or 2 a year of each of those 2 species. The exceptional thing about this one is how close the birds fly on a good flight date. If the winds are right, most of the birds are within 20 or 30 meters of us.
We're seeing something that most people never get to see, a golden eagle at eye level looking right at you. Sometimes they even drop below your level as they pass. Sometimes they come right over the top, and as they go over, they just kind of look right down at you and look right through you and then carry on, and it's just an amazing experience.
But one of the things I always say the benefit of this site is it gets people engaged with nature in a different way. And we get to see grizzly bears on occasion. We had one this morning just upridge of us at a nice, safe distance. Watched it walk up the trail.
I've been on the ridge looking through my binoculars, watching birds, when I've had a goat come by and bump my shoulder, bump my elbow as it walks by. And it's not bumping me on purpose, it's just walking on its trail.
The data from one monitoring site, really it takes many, many years for there to, for patterns to emerge that are very meaningful. But, we have to think of this as one of a whole network of monitoring sites across the continent that are tracking migrant raptor populations. And there's not very good standardized surveys for raptors in their breeding territories because they're widely spread when they're nesting, and so migration is one of the times when you can get concentrations of birds, and so you can get some idea of overall abundance. And in the case, like I mentioned earlier, this site, because we can separate the young birds from the adult birds, we get an index of the age ratio. It tells us sort of how reproductive performance has been, especially in these accipiters, because once they're a year old, they look like adults. So we know that all the ones that are immature birds are this year's young, so we get some sort of a measure of that. And again, if you add our data to the data from other sites around the West, we might see trends. When we look at the trends, even just from our site, they seem to match what some of the continental trends are. Golden eagle numbers seem to be declining. Cooper's hawks numbers seem to be increasing. Red-tailed hawk numbers seem to be increasing. The data we collect here does fit into that sort of larger picture. And when you're sitting on 20 years of data, maybe you can discern some patterns later on that you weren't even thinking about measuring. So, you know, the ratio between species and the timing of migration as we deal with climate issues, you know, is the timing of migration changing? Certainly this year it has been odd in that everything seems to be delayed. We just haven't seen that many birds yet, and that could mean that there was a bit of a failure in the breeding range, or it could just mean that the birds are held up further north by all the warm weather we've been having. It's hard to say. I mean, most migrant birds are really not dependent on the weather as much as the photo period, so it shouldn't change that much. But you know, again, that's some of the stuff that we may find. We have data that we can answer questions we haven't even asked yet.
There are some special days up there when it's why we go do this.
And I was down at the low spot and I saw a Cooper's hawk go by. I was scanning the ridge. I don't remember the fact that the owl wasn't up, but I saw a Cooper's hawk, so I called her and said, I'd seen the Cooper's, did you miss it? And she goes, I've got 53 birds already.
Was it really that many?
Yeah, it was like at 10:30.
Yeah, and it was when I first got here. I got here at quarter till 10, and one of the first things you do, you get here a little early and set the site up, and you put the plastic owl up. But as soon as I got here, a Cooper's went like literally 2 meters from my head, and I could not go get the owl because they just were coming. I was like, Dan, you got to get up here. I think it's going to be a big day. And all these other people started showing up, which was a really good thing. And someone had paper and pencil, which was just critical. And there were times that they would come in pulses, and we'd maybe have 5 or 10 birds at once. And if they're all different ages or different species, so I was working as fast as I could while somebody else was doing the overflow on paper and pencil. And then finally BJ offered to take over for me for a bit so I could eat lunch.
With birders, you don't think of being out of breath watching birds, but we were all out of breath. It was just fabulous and laughing. It was really a fun experience that most of the world wouldn't think actually birders go through.
So just like right now, there were 2 birds coming at the same time, and it's like, okay, are you on the upper one or the lower one? Well, that day it was like, okay, there's 5 in the notch and there's 2 overhead, and then someone's going, well, did you get this one over here?
Yeah.
It's just crazy.
It was really good that we had so many people up here that day.
Dan Casey and another watcher were once standing on the ridge facing south, about 5 feet apart, and had a peregrine falcon fly from behind between them at waist height. Knowing how fast peregrines can fly, it was probably ahead of its sound. We're here to gather data, get some idea of population and migration trends, and to quantify. But after we have done it just once, we realize that the science is at least partly our excuse to be here, to sit quietly in the middle of a world normally available only to birds for the last 100 million years. For them, that's a lot of practice, and it shows.
Here's a pathway, a migratory pathway that wasn't really known until recently, and yet another value of these lands and this landscape. And of course, one of the benefits is just getting people out and sharing, how to identify these birds, enjoying them, telling the story, and we all say when we come up here, of course, even on a day when the birds aren't flying well, it's an awfully nice place to spend the day.
Up on the ridge, in addition to the passionate birders who are keeping track of the passing migrators, the public can also come there, and a lot of people are hiking just come by accident, or it's not much of a hike for someone that's interested to come up there. And it's really fun to watch people see a bird that close for the very first time. They are just giddy, and it's really fun to see the public get involved, and sometimes those members of the public have become us.
For the last 17 years, the jewelers, as we call ourselves, have been up there on top of the Hawk Watchers world, hoping to share this space with hawks, eagles, and falcons on a mission. After their morning hunt, they are ready to tack into the southwest wind, mostly motionless and well over the speed limit. There's nothing remotely like watching a golden eagle from above, focused on the south at 100 miles an hour. This place is a peek into the world of birds usually available only to them in the endless world of air. This is the home of wow. Author Lauren Isley once said, "If there's magic in the world, it is found in water." That is true, but we jewelers know that magic is most assuredly also found in the air.